Hi, everyone. We are here with Chris Rideout. So glad to have him with us today. Chris is one of the co founders of the Legal Writing Institute. He's also one of the organizers of our very first biennial. He's a co founder of the legal writing program at the University of Puget Sound Law School, which is now Seattle University School of Law. And he's also the first president of the Legal Writing Institute. So thank you so much, Chris, for joining us today. And we are excited to talk with you about your first presidency. I wanted to start by asking you about how you became the first president of the Legal Writing Institute and whether that was for a 1 year or a 2 year term.
After the 1984 conference, there was a desire to start an institute, and there was an organizing meeting in 1985 at a AALS section on legal writing day-long workshop in Chicago. In 1985, a group of us decided to have the Legal Writing Institute. We kind of declared that it existed just out of thin air, and we planned to have a second biennial conference in 1986, again at the University of Puget Sound in Tacoma, Washington. Turned out to be a great place to have a conference. That 1986 conference, we had a second meeting. This time it was a kind of organizing meeting for the Legal Writing Institute, which we had declared existed. And I'm trying to remember now. Yes, this was in July of 1986. And by then, Laurel Oates and I had formally registered the Legal Writing Institute as a 501c3 organization in the state of Washington. So we had a kind of official legal status. So at the 1986 meeting at the conference in July, we decided to, I can't remember how we did it, but we decided to elect officers. And I got elected president. Laurel and I had been doing all this work organizing these conferences. I'm the one who got the grant money to start the whole conference thing in 1984. I had a lot of experience with college writing program conferences and organizations. Maybe that was why, I don't know. So anyway, I was elected president. There were no term limits. And so I just was the president. There were a couple of other officers who were elected. I remember that Ann Anquist was elected the treasurer. I don't remember who else got elected. It kind of didn't matter because our idea for the Legal Writing Institute was that it was non-hierarchical and that it was sort of grassroots driven. So a lot of the work increasingly was done by volunteers from all over the country. And Laurel Oates and I just continued to work together. So I saw myself as a facilitator more than anything else. And I stayed president until 96. And at that point, the officers thing got formalized. I think the board rewrote the bylaws, and now there were term limits for officers and formal elections and things like that. But it was just a show of hands. The board only met every 2 years at the conference, and I would write reports from the board to the membership at large and publish them in the newsletter.
So, what was your vision? Were there any sort of major goals or major objectives that you were really hoping to accomplish during that first year?
Well, our objectives were fairly concrete. At the 1984 conference, at the end of the 1984 conference, there was a clamor by the people who had gone to the conference to start the institute. And Laurel and I actually administered an informal survey, not very scientific or anything. But the first question was, do people want to have an institute of some kind? And the unanimous answer was yes. Second question, do you want a conference held regularly? Yes. Third question, do you want a newsletter? Yes. Fourth question, do you want a journal? Yes. So we had fairly concrete goals and got to work on those. Behind it all, we really had this strong sense of community that came out of the 1984 conference and a realization that we were all doing a really great thing. We were all teaching legal writing in different ways at different law schools, but we all loved it. We all believed in it. We felt that we were forming a discipline and a community that emerged from that discipline. So that's the larger, loftier thing, I'd say.
Thinking about 1980s, very different means of communication than today. You didn't have all the committees at the beginning. What were some of the things that you were doing to maintain that sense of community and that exchange of ideas in between those biennials when you could come together as a group?
Well, that's a great question. It was a different time.
Hmm.
There was no internet, there was no email, there were no listservs, nothing. The way you communicated with each other was by writing letters or by getting on the telephone. But getting on the telephone was not a common thing to do because people were scattered all over the country, and these were long distance phone calls that cost a lot of money. Long distance calls were quite expensive in those days. There were no cell phones, of course. So, looking toward the next biennial conference held us all together. Everyone looked forward to that because that's when we all got together, said hi, exchanged ideas, went to sessions and things like that. I think the conferences held us together, and Laurel pretty quickly started publishing the newsletter, which came out once or twice a year. And of course, a newsletter built a sense of community as well. I guess the third thing I'd say is that after the 1986 conference, we had a committee structure. Nothing like the committee structure you have to manage these days. And that gave people a common purpose. There were a lot of people who wanted to pitch in and help. And so we just gave them jobs, put them on a committee, and that gave them a sense of attachment to the Institute.
What were some of those original committees?
Well, after 1986, we had a conference committee. I believe we had a newsletter committee, and we had a board of an editorial board for the journal. We had the 1986 conference at the University of Puget Sound, 1988 conference at the University of Puget Sound, and then 1990 conference was held in Ann Arbor, Michigan. By 1990, we were well underway, and we had a board of directors meeting that lasted over 3 hours. So we were doing a lot. And in my report, I'll mention some of the things. The newsletter, there was a committee on the newsletter. We had what's called a resource catalog where people could deposit. I think it's called the Idea Bank now.
Teaching Bank.
Teaching Bank,
Which we
okay.
still maintain on our website. And for the folks who are watching, the newsletter Chris is referring to is today known as the Second Draft. So we
Yes,
still publish that.
yes,
It's just called the Second Draft. So these
yes,
things began at pretty much the onset of the Legal Writing Institute, and they're
yes.
still an important part of our organization today.
Yes. So we had committees for those, and we had a committee for the survey
Hmm.
of legal writing programs, which Joe Ramsfield started. That was very important. By 1990, we had an election committee. The board of directors, the first board was elected. Well, in 1985, there was an informal group at that AALS meeting that decided we declared there's a legal writing institute. It wasn't a formally elected board of directors, it was informal. In the 1986 July meeting at the summer conference, again, we had a group that by then called itself a board of directors, but it was not elected. And right after that 1986 meeting, we held an election for the board of directors. And so by January 1st, 1987, we had a formally elected board of directors. So we also had an election committee. That's what this is all leading to. So we had an election committee. We had a conference committee. It was called the Survey and Site Committee. And we had a program committee for the conference. And we had some committee Susan Brody did most of the work, but we had a committee that decided on a new logo and stationery with our logo on it. So we were becoming pretty official by then.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But this was all done through the mail or once in a while by a long distance phone call. We'd make a long distance phone call once in a while, but we had to be careful. We didn't want to make our dean mad at us. He did generously at the University of Puget Sound. He generously supported our activities, and he was willing to let Lori Lamb, the administrative assistant for the legal writing program, also work on the Legal Writing Institute. And Lori became indispensable for the Legal Writing Institute. I think we used as bylaws the Articles of Incorporation for the Institute, and they were pretty skeletal.
Mm-hmm.
They just created the Institute legally.
Yeah.
We did agree that the board of directors would have 15 slots, and they were 4-year terms, but 8 of the slots went up for election in 2 years, and then the other 7 the next 2 years, et cetera, et cetera. So they were all alternating, and that provided some continuity
Mm-hmm.
on the board.
And we still follow that same structure with staggered elections. So you always have a
Yeah,
combination of seasoned, experienced board members and the new members being welcomed in. Was there anything that you really hoped to accomplish during your presidency, but you were unable to bring to fruition?
I'd have to think about that for a minute. Like I said, our goals were fairly concrete. We wanted to have a conference every 2 years. And of course, we wanted those to be successful and as inclusive as possible. We wanted the newsletter to come out.
Mhm.
We wanted to create the journal. And that, it was fairly, and we wanted to involve people as much as possible. But that was easy. People wanted to be involved and wanted to be on committees and things. Um, I think it just was such a different time. I was thinking the other day, um, legal writing programs back in the late 1980s. First of all, a lot of law schools did not have them.
Hmm.
The schools that did have them seldom offered long-term job security. Most people were on short-term contracts. There were just a very few schools, a handful of schools that either offered long-term job security, or a couple of people were in tenure track positions. You would go to a conference and look for people you had met at the previous conference, and they weren't there because they weren't teaching legal writing any longer. It was kind of weird, because they became friends and then suddenly you're out of touch. So just keeping the thing going, and I guess that was important to the identity of the Legal Writing Institute. Even if the people involved in teaching legal writing changed, there was continuity through the Institute. So
Mhm.
that was a big goal.
Mhm.
Give it an identity, have continuity for people involved in legal writing, even
Mhm.
if individual people didn't stay. And then, as I mentioned earlier, of course, kind of building a sense of community around a discipline, building the discipline.
And those remain core values of the Legal Writing Institute today is really creating that sense of community and connection for our members. You've already alluded to this a little bit as we've been chatting, but I just wanted to give you an opportunity to talk about it specifically. If you had to identify one or two of the biggest barriers you faced in that role, what would those be? I think you've touched on them already. Sort of this lack of technology made it really challenging to communicate and to work with people at other schools. I think that's a huge challenge that people that are in leadership of the LWI today have difficulty really understanding what it would be like to run an organization of this size with those challenges. Are there any others that jump to mind that you want to share?
Gosh, we were just inventing this thing. So we were so pleased that it was on its feet and going. I had a thought a second ago and it went away. Certainly, communication with the membership was a huge challenge because we didn't have the internet. So we had to use paper and the post office. And keeping that continuity because there was such turnover in the early years. But the conference helped with that a lot. We did realize early on that it was important to include sessions for new members. I think you and I and Laurel talked about this in another session, but the early conferences were largely about teaching. And it was pretty simple stuff, how to design a writing assignment, how to evaluate a paper, things like that. And we were all excited to be able to get together and share ideas about that at first. And then we realized that as some of the programs became more long term, they took that for granted. But other people were coming to the conference, and this was all brand new to them. So we had to start accommodating people who were new to legal writing. That was a bit of a challenge. And I guess a challenge, I'll be honest with you, because I'm fiscally conservative, a challenge for me was making sure we didn't go broke. And we only had one source of income, which was the conference registration fee. We always made it a little bit higher than we thought we would need to run the conference. And that's what went into the coffers and paid for the newsletter and then eventually the journal. So I was always conscious about that. If we ran out of money, then we were in big trouble because we just didn't have a big revenue stream.
I appreciate that. We continue to be very mindful of responsible stewardship because we
Yeah.
still, 40 years after the creation of this organization, we still don't charge any membership dues, which really is unique
Yes.
among organizations. And we still rely very heavily on our sort of signature event, our flagship event, which is our biennial.
Yes.
And people often don't realize that the biennial doesn't just pay for the biennial. The biennial pays for everything we do for 2 years, from our insurance and our listserv, our technology fees, to all the biennial expenses, our other conferences, our workshops, our grants. All of it comes,
Yes.
or the vast majority of it comes from the biennial, which is why it's so important. Um, and so I hear you when you say that's a challenge because it remains a challenge today, especially as costs rise.
Because there's so many more expenses. The Institute does so many things now. It was very
Mhm.
simple. In the early days, it was really quite simple.
I want to move now and talk about sort of a happier subject, which is what was the most rewarding aspect of being LWI president, particularly the first president, which is, you have such an opportunity to have a formative impact on that role forever and on that organization when you're the first president. So, what would you say is most rewarding?
That's a great question. I'm a fairly modest person, and I was the first LWI president, but I saw this as the work of many people. I was just the facilitator. But going to the conferences and seeing all of these people engaged and talking and making presentations and things, that was very rewarding for me. I just thought legal writing had so much potential. It was very exciting for me. So I didn't take credit for the Legal Writing Institute, but it was just so nice to see how successful both the Institute and the profession of teaching legal writing were becoming. That was very rewarding for me.
Well, I want to give a huge thanks to you and Laurel. We wouldn't have the organization that we have today without you. So we're very, very grateful. Looking back on your presidency, or is there anything with the benefit of hindsight that you wish you might have done differently or that you might advise current or future presidents to do differently?
Thanks to the efforts of many, many people, not just me, the Legal Writing Institute has been very successful. By the 1990 conference, I knew this thing was going to keep going. It was a big deal, and it was defining a discipline. So it's hard to look back at something so successful and go, gee, I should have done this differently or that differently. If I could have invented the internet, I would have done that. and devoted all the profits, of course, to the Legal Writing Institute. But communication was hard. That was hard. But I don't know how to handle that differently. But it was just so successful. The only thing I can say is thank you to all the people, you and everyone else before you who kept this thing going.
Is there any other advice that you would give on effective leadership or how to handle difficult decisions or
Well, you have to stay in touch with the membership. The membership was much smaller when I was president, and so it was easier, but there was no internet. So there must be ways now that you do that. Certainly, I found that I had to give reports to the membership. And if there was a board of directors meeting, they wanted to know what was going on in the board of directors meeting. So I would write a report. So you have to stay in touch with the membership. I always thought it would be great if we found some other way to make money. But what I would say at the end is there are so many people who have made the Legal Writing Institute what it is today. And I'm grateful to all of them, including you, for doing this project. So thank you.
and thank you, Chris. We are all indebted to you and to Laurel and all the founders, and I really appreciate you talking with us today. Thank you so much.
Thank you.